A deal has now been signed between the United States and the Taliban, where effectively the deal works, and I'll get to the package explaining it in a second here. They're going to withdraw troops, start to withdraw troops now, slowly get down to about 5,000 or so, and then pull those out over the next 12 months, because the promise from the Taliban is that the Taliban is going to try to fight ISIS, Al-Qaeda or anyone else who wants to turn the joint into a terrorist haven. Now, does it mean that there is about to be a Taliban who's not going to enslave women, not going to do everything that we know is in their heart? I don't know, but here's the latest from Fox.
It could at least be the beginning of the end of the very long war here in Afghanistan, signed in Doha, Qatar, with Secretary of State Pompeo presiding, an agreement between the United States and the Taliban that calls for the withdrawal of U.S. troops down to about 8,600 in the next months, with much of the remainder following that. That based, however, on the enemy, the Taliban, following through on conditions, including severing ties with other terror groups. We asked Secretary of Defense Esper, who was here in Kabul, about the importance and the risks of this agreement.
I think this is an historic day that offers a great deal of hope, but we know that it will be a windy road, a bumpy road. It may have its setbacks, but we're committed, again, to our Afghan partners, with our NATO allies, to follow the path of peace and stability. The only way forward, the best way forward, is through a political agreement.
Secretary Esper, Afghan President Ghani, and others were at a ceremony here in Kabul also marking the agreement. Now, according to many, begins the hard part. Upcoming talks between the Afghans and the Taliban to share power in a future government.
All right, Jim, how do you feel about this as not just the longest war in America's history? It certainly is up there for Australia. We've been there the whole time.
Paul, this is a tough one for the simple reason that we've lost 41 lives in that country. The Americans have lost 2,500 lives. We've had 261 people injured in this fight, and I feel very sensitive about criticising the fight. But I have a deep belief that if you're going to get into a war and you're not in it to win it, you should not get into it in the first place. We have done this in Iraq. Under Obama, we pulled out precipitately and we had to go back in. We've done it in Afghanistan and we had to go back in. In our small way in Australia, we've done it in East Timor and we had to go back in. At least what Secretary Esper is trying to do is to withdraw slowly, and I think they should try. And the Americans have said, OK, we'll give you 3 months. If there's no heavy fighting in 3 months, we'll take a third of our troops out. Then 18 months later, we'll take the rest of them out. If you've still got 8,000 or 10,000 troops in there, the Americans can certainly leap back in at the Taliban, and there's a couple of 100,000 Afghan troops, of course. I feel very uncomfortable about this. John Bolton, the last National Security Advisor to President Trump, and they had a falling out, has criticised President Trump and said this is what Obama did and got so wrong.
Well, because I remember at the time, part of the criticism of the way that Obama pulled out of Iraq was that by giving a timetable, you can say to the Taliban, who will of course play nice for the length of the timetable, and then once you've removed the troops, then they go back to potentially old form. Now, again, with respect to everyone who has fought, all of those lives, all of those injuries, do you trust that the Taliban that has negotiated this is different than the Taliban that was there when our troops landed in 2001?
No, not at all, Paul, and I don't think anyone really does. I think that this has an interesting time frame around it, which corresponds and is synchronised, I suspect, with the American elections. And this enables the President Trump to take a particular view on what he's doing. But I wouldn't trust them as far as I can boot them, and that's not very far at all.